Thank you for the invitation, and I will discuss a little health risks by wireless radiation. We have been doing research for quite a long time in our research group, which has fortunately been included with a link to Estonia with Tarmo Koppel, who has been doing research on exposure in the environment, which has so far given somewhat 10 or 12 publications in a short time, which are very much reading. This is a diversity of persons. We have a statistician, Michael Karlberg, and then we have many both medical persons and also people who do some physics, like Kjell Hansson Mild up in Umeå in Sweden. So my understanding is that this is a typical area that needs to be studied by multiple disciplines. It's not so easy to study it as a single group or a single person. It needs to have collaboration. This shows the scheme of non-ionizing radiation, which we are talking about. We have up here ionizing radiation like X-rays and also the gamma rays, which we use in cancer treatment, like radiating tumors, and these give obviously damage to the DNA, so the cell is killed. When we go down, we have the visible light, infrared, and here are the microwaves. And usually they have been in this range, but now we are going up to the millimeter waves up here in more than 20 gigahertz. We have ultrasound and radio waves here, and this shows also that the human body is an electrical thing. We have the ECG, the heart function, which is down there. What about the old type of radiation? This will be quite different with 5G. These are studies by Gandhi, and it shows the penetration of the mobile phone signal into the brain for GSM mobile phone, 800 megahertz. And here is the grown up, here is the ear where the mobile phone is used, and you can see the penetration to the brain, which is falling with distance to the other side of the brain. Here is the mouth, and here is the back of the brain. If you have a 10-year-old child, then, as you can see, much more is radiated, and actually a 5-year-old, almost the whole brain is radiated to that amount. And this is, of course, something to be noticed because the use of mobile phones and cordless phones goes down in ages, so very young persons use these devices. The distribution for 5G for the higher frequencies will be different, and actually I haven't seen that has been studied so far. If you have a mobile phone using 5G, I don't know if Martin Pall has any comments on that, but this is one of the issues that is not recognized when the 5G is about to be installed. It has also been shown actually that the radiation is even higher because the SAR, which is said to be 2 watts per kilogram in Europe, it depends on the distance between the mobile phone and the brain, and if you have a very short distance, the radiation will be higher. So actually the mobile phone advice is that you should keep the phone 1 or 1.5 centimeter from the ear. And obviously this is not done. So these old measurements are not protective so far. This is a drawing by Tarmo Koppel, actually, which shows that we have a change of the antenna. The first ones had an antenna which could be even extractable, and it could give, or it gave actually a lower radiation to the brain. Then we got the smartphones and the latest type, which has also an antenna at the base of the smartphone. Here is the thyroid gland, which is quite close to the smartphone and smartphone antenna at the base. And actually, the thyroid radiation is the same amount as the brain. So there's Western world has been shown a very high increase of the thyroid cancer. We have published that in Sweden together with Thermo and others, and it has also been shown in the United States. Actually, nobody wants to discuss this problem that you have a radiation which is close to the thyroid gland. But we can also see that the radiosensitive type of the thyroid gland is especially sensitive to radiation of the highest increase. Access to mobile phone is almost satisfied in the or saturated in the world. You have the first type, which was 2G, and it's going down. Then we have 3G and 4G. And as you can see, that almost the whole world population is using mobile phones. And this is one thing which seems to be a problem to regulate this, because most people enjoy this. It's addictive and it gives benefit like the dopamine kicks and so on. So, and as you know, you go on the bus or the train and 90% almost are looking at the mobile phone while they are riding. So it's most people's habit. Yes, let's see, did I drop one? In 2011, IARC, International Agency for Research on Cancer at WHO, made a risk assessment of radiofrequency radiation. And there was a panel meeting for 1 week. I was one of the persons there. And it was a very, most people voted for group 2B, that is possibly carcinogenic. There's another group is 2A that is probably carcinogenic, and group 1 that is carcinogenic, like for smoking and asbestos and TCDD and so on. This was based on increased risk for glioma, which is a type of brain tumor, and also acoustic neuronoma, which is a tumor on the hearing nerve in the ear. And this goes for all wireless radiation. So it goes also for higher frequencies, 30 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. So as you can see from this evaluation, it includes 5G if you go up to 26 gigahertz, which is the case now. IARC will make a new evaluation within 5 years, according to the decision this spring. And that means that they will take into account the new evidence that has come out, that there are more human studies on increased risk for glioma and acoustic neuronoma, and also the animal studies on showing the same types of tumors. So this shows schematically the evaluation of radiation of different sources, and this kind of antennas is not uncommon nowadays. So what is the evidence on glioma, the brain tumors? This type of tumor, it's graded in 4 grades, and the most one is very invasive. It doesn't give secondaries anywhere, but it's very hard to surgery get rid of, because this grows like antennas, or grows out in the surrounding tissue, and it's difficult to operate because you don't want to have a damage to the rest of the brain. Anyhow, if you look into these studies, and these are cases that are exposed and controls, numbers of them, and also for the risk of tumor on the same side as the phone has been used. And as I showed, the highest exposure is within that area. And in the highest exposure group, there was a statistically significant increased risk in Interphone, a large international study, Corot study, which is a French study, and our study. And the summary risk is about 2.5. So there is a statistically significant increased risk. The same analysis for acoustic neuronoma. It's on the hearing nerve, which starts in the ear and goes into the brain. And here is, of course, a high radiation because the airway is open to give the radiation into this area. And the tumor can be in any part of this. And the same studies, like in the interphone and our studies, shows that it's almost 3 times increased risk. And these tumors are actually increasing in numbers or in incidence. So what are the new findings? This is the NTP, National Toxicology Program study from United States, which is very expensive and has been done for many years. And here are animals that are exposed to GSM modulation or CDMA, which is an American type, as I understand. The control group, 1.5 kilograms, watt per kilogram, 3.0 and 6.0 watt per kilogram. And you can see here that the numbers of malignant glioma are increased in these exposed groups, and also hyperplasia, increasing amount of these cell types that are pre-malignant. This goes for both types of exposures, that there is clearly an increased incidence of these tumors. So it was even significant here. In the same study, they looked into schwannomas, that is the acoustic nevrinoma cell types, and these tumors, and they found in hearts, because you have the same types of cells in the heart, you find here an increasing incidence of these tumors in both studies, and also in other sites there was some evidence, and in total there was a higher incidence in exposed rats than in the controls. So based on NTP, there is a similar or the same type of tumors as in human epidemiology studies, which is rather uncommon that you find exactly the same tumor type. There was at the same time another study, the Ramazzini Italian study, which came out, and you can see here it's an exposure comparable to base stations, so it's far distance exposure, and here are the controls, 5 volt per meter, 25 and 50 volts per meter, and you can see that there is again an increased number of gliomas and this cell proliferation of the glia cells in males and in females, and also in total there are more than in controls. So these show the same pattern as in the NTP study. And if you go to the Schwann cells, which are the acoustic nevrinoma types of cells, and these tumors, you see again in the Ramazzini Institute that the number is especially high in the 50 volts per meter, both in females and in male animals, and in total it's the highest incidence. And this should be noticed that these tumor types come out within the safety limits we have today. I mean, if it's 61 volts per meter by ICNIRP, and here is a lower exposure in all these groups. There has not been much regulation based on these findings so far, which is somewhat surprising. What about 5G? Well, 5G is somewhat different to the previous ones. And I think Martin Pall will discuss more about the pulsation and the effects of 5G. We have, at least in Sweden, permission to use 700 megahertz 5G. It's a lower frequency, so it means that it can radiate a longer distance than the higher frequencies, which is 3.4, 3.6 gigahertz, and then there's also a permission to use 26 to 27 gigahertz. They start with the lower frequencies, but there is also they can also use the higher frequencies, which will give quite a different distribution of the exposure. So this technique has evolved over the years. First, we had the first generation of mobile phones, which were these large phones, started in early 1980s, and going on to GSM phones, 3G and 4G with the smartphones, and also, of course, quite a lot of more applications in this form. And now we are going over to 5G. These are pictures by Ericsson, mobile company in Sweden, how these antennas look like. There are a base station with multiple antennas in each base station, and there is what they call MIMO technique, multiple input, multiple output of these. And the technique, which is different to the previous ones, needs to have multiple antennas to serve many consumers. And the vision by telecom industry is that we should use 5G for everything. So we should be connected all over the place, and different devices, and this will be very small gadgets that can be communicated to internet. So you can count the numbers of your milk packages in the refrigerator and look into other items when it's needed. So one can wonder where the human beings is in all this situation. So there is no limit for the fantasy, how much can be used. So this is then a scheme of the different types of frequencies. We have the low frequency, like 700 megahertz, this color, and you can see that a base station covers quite a large area. It's like a sector radiation, as you know. So a large area is covered by radiation. And if you go higher into frequency, you can see here 3.4 gigahertz. Then it will be a more narrow radiation. What is new with these millimeter waves, like 26 gigahertz, is that the beam will be very narrow, as you can see. So it needs to have multiple antennas to cover an area. And actually, when I asked Ericsson about these beams, they said that they are about 60 meters wide and 40 meters high. So it's a sector 40 meter high and 60 meter broad, which is communicating with a device like a car, which is going here, and it's communicating both ways all the time. So these beams are actually moving after the targets. So if you're walking on the street, the beam will follow you until the next antenna will take care of you. So it's quite different because they are moving all the time. And of course, you can have these in your buildings, and you have here base station on a lamppost, and because of the high frequency, it's not sure that it will penetrate the whole building. So there's a discussion that you need to have a secondary antenna in the house, in the building, which will propagate the signal into the different devices in the building. So how can this look like? So if you have a 5G base station or mast, it will communicate with different devices as is needed. So like cars that are moving here are followed by this beam, and then it comes to the other sector. So it's, as I understand, switched to another beam, and so on. And these are moving all the time, all the time. I think that people in general do not understand that these are moving and that they can cross each other. So when this moves up there and the other one comes there, they can have additive exposure of the beams. So it's a two-way communication. It goes up and down all the time, and this is very quick pulses, extremely quick pulses. So and that's needed, of course, if you will have safe driving cars. It's always trying to get the best connection, and it needed higher radiation level when buildings, trees, vegetation, snow, rain, fog, etc. are involved. They are shielding because these items can shield the beam. So they may need indoor antennas. There is a very interesting 5G deployment analysis that came out from EU in early April. It was asked for by I3E, the Committee for Industrial Questions for Research and Energy. And it was made by two authors, Colin Blackman and Simon Forge, and they do usually work for industry, these guys. I'm surprised that this report hasn't been discussed at all, because it's clear warnings for 5G in that report, and it is an EU report. They say first that, in summary, that this system will be 3 times more expensive than the current system. It's driven by telecom, and it's needed to convince governments that 5G is needed. And as you know, they have succeeded in that. And the industry has influenced governments that 5G is needed, and that is nothing that the layman, the person on the street, is asking for 5G, saying that we need 5G, you must install it. I have taken some parts of that 26 pages article, and first, as you know, industry and media claim that there is a race on 5G. So they have created a race on 5G all over the world. Who will win the race? Is it China? Is it USA? Or is it Europe? And this creates a demand for 5G. We need to be very quick to install 5G, even before we have made any assessment of risks. Well, what is it used for primarily? It's for video downloading, for entertainment, social networks, and Internet of Things. So here is a big use of it for entertainment. But then, of course, Internet of Things comes out, and of course the industrial sector. Well, one can ask also, as they say in the article, is 5G safe? Who will pay? Because it will be expensive, and there is no quick fix. They say that the implementation will take about 10 years, but they will start with cities, like some cities in Sweden, where they say that we will be the first 5G city in the world. The technologies involved with 5G are much more complex. And as I discussed previously, it's not well understood how the propagation of the patterns that could result in unacceptable levels of human exposure, how this propagation is. I mean, they say clearly in the report that you cannot predict the exposure to human beings. And they say also all this is from the report actually. The notion of a race is part of the campaign, but that this technology will take much longer than earlier generations. And China says that it's at least 10-year program to be fully working and completely rolled out nationally. But that means that at that time, everybody will be exposed. There is no possibility to escape. And also we have, of course, the rays in the from above, from satellites, which are to be sent up, thousands of them. And again, that they say that the technology is much more complex and is not well understood, as I said, the propagation of the beam, and it can give unacceptable levels of human exposure. So here is an EU document which says that there is the risk of unacceptable level of human exposure. Why doesn't anybody care? I mean, like the politicians. That's an interesting question. They say also that long-term research and development, RD, is needed to understand the multiple propagation unknowns, measuring and controlling exposure due to the unknown propagation of the field, which is very complex and cannot be predicted from laboratory studies. It must be studied in the real world. And as I said, the beam is focused rather than transmitting a wide area. And as I said, Ericsson said that it's about 60 versus 40 meter. And it's based on an active antenna technique, which is used to steerable radio beams with power focused on a small area, the receiving handset, and that is moving all the time. How is the distance, the range? It's reduced by square of the distance, and it's depending on the frequency. So here you can see the old system, like 700 megahertz. It can be 1 kilometer range, but when you go down to or rather up to 26 gigahertz, which is applied here, you see it's some tens of meters of the range of the beam. So it's very short. And this means that you must have very many base stations. And the problems is, of course, as I said, rain, snow, fog, trees, vegetation, especially during rain. What will they do in towns when there are large trees which are in the way of the radiation? Buildings, walls, etc. Everything like that will be a problem, although there will, of course, be some reflection from the building walls of the beam. So with the higher frequencies like that which is now allowed, a typical range is 20 to 100 meter, and for 1 square kilometer needs about 800 base stations, if only 20 meter range. So you see, this is a huge amount of base stations, and furthermore, all need a battery backup, which is not discussed at all, actually, that this will be a large demand on batteries and also maintenance of the batteries. And this is because you may, when you get the electrical shortfall, you need to have the battery backup so that the system is not falling down immediately. And this is, of course, something that the telecom industry likes, because they can sell quite a lot of antennas. And actually, Ericsson in Sweden had negative figures 1 year ago, and now they are making money again. So they're selling the 5G system. Yeah, okay. And so this will be costly, and the question is who will pay, and it will certainly be those who use 5G technology that will have to pay. What they say in this document is that it's needed to simplify and harmonize the authorization, permits, and planning so that they have a standard in EU. So no individual country should have their objections to roll out 5G. Small cell standards are needed to give EU a way forward for high quality outdoor and indoor connectivity, and to enable rapid rollout of perhaps hundreds of small cells per square kilometer. So there is a EU law maybe coming that says that you can't resist in any country to the rollout. Well, they say also that significant concern is coming over the possible impact on health and safety from the higher exposure to radio frequency. And they also state that increased exposure may result both from the higher frequency, but also from the potential of aggregation of different signals. And this can be especially a problem in dense urban areas. So this goes back to one of the earlier pictures which showed of the propagating fields which are moving around and can cross each other. So what's happening to children that are walking on the sideway and they are exposed in a city to different 5G beams? This is also interesting because from industry and from some agencies, they say that clearly there will not be any increased exposure. It may even be lower exposure, some state. But here they state absolutely in this document that the exposure will increase. Yeah, so they say here again that, as I have discussed, that the focus beams, they are moving rapidly with time and movement are unpredictable, and this has yet to be mapped reliably for real situations outside the laboratory. This is not done, so it needs to be studied outside the laboratory according to this document. So why is nobody listening to that? That's a big question, and why are they so happy to roll out it quickly? Here is ICNIRP. As you may know, ICNIRP has issued the guidelines for limiting exposure, and they are now in the process to write new guidelines and may even increase the level of exposure. They say that it's not possible to follow ICNIRP guidelines because it's not possible to accurately simulate or measure 5G emissions currently. So they say clearly in this document that the ICNIRP guidelines cannot be used for 5G. There needs to be new research done. Finally, they discuss factors for 5G success. And the key factor will be the ease with which a large number of small cells can be deployed in densifying the network. And they end up with China and the Asian tiger economies, that they're much easier because they can mandate deployment without the need for public assent. So it's quite different to what is in Europe, because there are citizen groups all over Europe that are, or in most countries, that are making the protest heard now against 5G. And obviously they don't like it in this document. So they say that free installation is needed in EU from 2020. So this is a very dangerous conclusion by the document, that EU politicians should give a free installation of 5G, and they say also that there is an intense lobbying of governments by equipment suppliers and operators, and much is happening behind the doors, which are unknown to the public. We don't really know how the corridor is used to influence the governments by the industry. But they are also taking up public influence by governments, and they don't want to have public to make the voice heard. They want to have it behind closed doors, and suddenly we have it. The recommendation, anyhow, in that document is that long-term technology research is essential. And again, they came to this propagation of the radiation, which is unknown, and it is also a challenge to the current level of expertise, because the technology is quite different. So the end of this document is actually that 5G is not ready to be deployed. It needs to be much more research until it is done. But of course, what is the aim of 5G? It's improved consumer experience, more connected devices, faster connector speeds, and also this is a what we call Google glasses, and will give rather high exposure to the frontal part of the brain and to the eyes. So this is a very risky behavior. But it gives also an opportunity to have a track of the population, because the information is going both ways. So using the antennas, you can really track what people are doing and where they are. Where for e-health, transports and logistic, environmental monitoring, I mean, it's interesting with the hospitals that want to have 5G, because if you have a radiation that is increasing the tumor risk, and also clearly shown that it's increasing the growth of the tumor, how can you use it in a hospital where you have cancer patients, or when you have bacterial culture, and we know that it can give bacterial resistance also. So, and what about the universities? If you have 5G exposure and have laboratory studies, how should they be evaluated in the future? It could be a contamination. And of course, the hype about self-driving cars. And this is a estimated situation where you have these beams going to different directions, and in this study there'll be an increase of EMFs in these different points actually. And this is of course the communication between self-driving cars, and but they don't discuss what's happening on the sideway and other people in this area. And also that you may need to have base stations in the home, like this one, and we will in the future see these types of antennas. So I will end with discussing what do we know about 5G and the safety. There are actually very few studies. There are problems with the skin, with the eyes, sweat glands that can have an antenna effect, and I said some effects on bacteria has been shown, and antibiotic resistance. One problem is, of course, with the SAR. What ICNIRP does is to make an average exposure. It's like having focusing the light, sunshine, for example, in one point, and you have a very high exposure in that point that can harm the skin, for example. What the ICNIRP does is that they average this exposure over a larger area, and moreover, I think Martin Pall will discuss it, they are not counting on the pulses, but they take an average exposure. So if the pulse is very high, then they take the average of 6 minutes, which is not adequate. I mean, there can be very high exposure in the pulses, and it has been shown that the pulses are actually more dangerous than the continuous average. This study is quite recent, and it shows the permanent tissue damage by Neufeld and Kuster by radiation which is below ICNIRP's permitted level. And these, interestingly, these guys, they usually work for industry. They are providing items for industry, how to measure these fields. And we have also the eye, which is certainly problematic because these are very superficial structures, and the 5G signal can penetrate into the eye. So there one can anticipate that there may be problems with the eye. And what about the eye if you have propagating different fields which are concentrated at one point? There can be, which is not studied as far, but that there is a risk that there can be permanent damage to the eye. One study that has been done is on the sweat glands. Here is the skin, and here is the sweat gland, and it has been in that Italian study shown that this can be an antenna propagating the signal more deep into the body. So it's an antenna effect by the sweat duct. There are also some Russian studies showing that the nerve roots on the skin can be antennas and propagating the 5G signal into the body. So as I said, ICNIRP gives this level of exposure, and as I understand, there is, for example, in Finland a discussion to increase this level in a concentrated small area, because they know about the problem with the concentrated beam. What's coming out of that, I don't really know, but there is a fear that ICNIRP will even permit higher exposure than this one. I wrote a couple of years ago an article about WHO, radio frequency radiation and health, a hard nut to crack. And it's really a hard nut to crack. We were 5 scientists who were at the meeting at WHO. One of these scientists is sitting here, actually, and discussed this and offered them our help. I mean, what they said is that ICNIRP is our official body for research and advice on radio frequency radiation, and we are not interested of your expertise. So we said you should have an international body of scientists who don't have any conflicts of interest, and they refused to that. So that's what I have described in this review, which has been opened almost 60,000 times on the net. So it has had a very, very high attention. So this is, there are lots of money involved, there are lots of conflicts of interest, both scientific and personal interests, conflicts of interest. Well, what about the guidelines in different countries? This shows the ICNIRP level, and I guess Estonia is up here, like the Nordic countries. It's very high level. And then there is a number of countries that have lower exposure levels, like in Belgium and Italy and so on, and even China and Russia, India. So one can, of course, discuss what is the difference in the scientific evidence in different countries, because some give lower estimates of exposure than ICNIRP. What ICNIRP has been doing over the years is to try to harmonize this exposure level. They want every country all over the world to have the same exposure as ICNIRP says. And ICNIRP does only rely on heating effect and not on other biological effects by radio frequency radiation. Well, this is interesting in relation to 5G. And this is actually a slide from Ericsson company in Sweden, which was presented at a work seminar in 2017. And here is the propagating field, these cascades of fields coming out from an antenna located here. And here is, here in this example, is 70 meter high. And they are discussing the safety limit. And if you have ICNIRP limits, the safety zone is quite small around the antenna. But if you have an exclusion zone of 0.1 watt per square meter, 100 of ICNIRP limit, then the exclusion zone will be 150 meter. So what could be done is, of course, to have a lower permitted exposure than ICNIRP. And then what they say in Ericsson is that size of the exclusion zone makes 5G network rollout a major problem or even impossible. So that means that the Ericsson company or other companies will have major problems with ICNIRP, with these levels, which are much lower than ICNIRP. So 100 of this, it gives all these countries, they can't roll out 5G because of the exclusion zone will be so wide, like 150 meter. So in fact, there are a number of countries that have said that, I don't think this is collecting all of them, but like in Belgium, in Brussels, they say they are halting 5G rollout because people of Brussels are not guinea pigs whose health I can sell as a profit, said by the Belgian environmental minister. And it's interesting because EU is located here, so they protect themselves if we should talk in clear sentences. What about Switzerland? There is Canton of Vaud said that there should be a moratorium. And interestingly, same in Geneva, there is a moratorium on 5G. This is of course not definite, but they ask for research of product. And who is sitting in Switzerland is WHO, so they are also protecting themselves. Actually, we measured, with the help of Tarmo here, the exposure in the WHO building in Geneva, and it was quite low. It's some 10 or 20 microwatts per square meter, which is what you can usually tolerate. It's quite a difference that many houses have several thousand of microwatts. So interestingly, WHO people are protected from this radiation in their office, which is no good. There are also some parts of Italy that I didn't have here that have made a stop to install 5G. This is a very low, the 5G 24 gigahertz up to 90 gigahertz frequency, and it's still in the limit that the ICNIRP, that IARC said is a possible human carcinogen. But this technique has been used by military as a weapon using 95 gigahertz frequency. It's a well-known technique because if you radiate people with this frequency, and as I said, there will be quite a high skin absorption of the radiation, they will have an immediate burning sensation in the skin, and people are just disappearing. They are running always to get rid of this, so it can be a weapon to control people. So this is known. So why should we use this for all persons, although the radiation level will be lower? I would just end reminding of difference between the old mobile phones and smartphones. This is the old ones where they had maybe every 30 minutes a signal to the base station just to show the localization of the mobile phone. But so it's it can be high pulses, but it's not so often. This is a smartphone, especially if you have lots of apps. They are updating all the time, even if you don't want it. And if you have this in your bedroom, or as young persons have below the pillow, because they want to have these lights to look in the middle of the night, they are actually intermittently exposed signal maybe every second minute. This is depending how many apps they have, but we have made some measurements that the peak exposure in such signals can be quite significant. So shut it off over the night. I haven't at all discussed effects on bees, birds and plants, and there are a number of studies showing damage, and this might even be a worse situation as to nature than we have for human beings in the future. And personally, I'm not quite convinced that the brain tumor issue is the biggest problem. I think there are much more other health effects which are unknown so far with 5G, and also effects on nature which are unknown. I would end with this picture showing, I was interviewed by a Swedish journalist a couple of weeks ago, and she said all the time, like a mantra, that the majority of researchers say that this is safe. There is no risk whatsoever with anything with the radio frequency. She had interviewed before me a Swedish prominent person, Maria Feisting, but what you can think of is that this is not the majority. They are quite few. The majority have, for example, signed the EMF Science Appeal, which is almost 250 scientists that have signed it, and all with their own research in this area, like Martin Pall and others. These persons are sitting in different organizations, as you can see here, within WHO group, expert group, within ICNIRP, without United States AGNIR, without the Swedish Radiation Protection Agency, and with SKINIR. And the problem is here that you will get repetition of what is said, because, for example, Maria Feistings, she says that she's not here to defend, but she has heard this from me before, so she knows it. She can say, but look here, ICNIRP came to the same conclusion, and look here in United Kingdom, AGNIR, and the Swedish Radiation Protection Agency, they came to the same conclusion. The problem is that it's the same persons. If you in ICNIRP come to one conclusion, you are not expected to go to another organization and come to a different conclusion. So this is a very dangerous situation, because like SSM in Sweden, they are not allowing any critical person. All the persons who are sitting there are those yes or no sayers. I mean, they say, no, there is not any risk. And they make their assessment yearly, updating what evidence has come. They do not make an overview of several years, for example, what is the total pattern. For example, when the NTP study came out with the American animal study, Maria Feisting was very quick to go out to media and say, well, yes, look here, the researchers who were doing the microscopic studies of exposed and unexposed animals, they knew what animals were exposed and who was not exposed, so they were biased. And NTP was contacted and said this was not the case. We have good qualification of what we are doing, and this is published. But I mean, if you can't do anything else, you create doubt. I mean, like a book which is written, doubt is their product, which comes from industry. So I would say that the situation just now is more alike than this, and we need people to waken up. The scientific data are there. It's clearly this type of radiation is dangerous to human health and maybe to nature. And I would say that it's time to act and not to let 5G to be implemented all over the world until research has been done. I mean, it's fine if there is no risk, but that needs to be shown. And of course, I haven't discussed at all if you would use a wired connection, if you would use a cable. We're discussing the radio frequency radiation, which is the issue for this topic. Okay, thank you for I was talking too long.
Thank you. Now time for questions. I would have to repeat this for the video. So I think the question was, based on the knowledge you have right now, what is the biggest danger of the radiation?
Yeah, well, I would say that
5G,
it's unknown, because as I showed, there are so few studies that have been done. So this goes to the bottom line that there should be a moratorium. We have written to EU asking for a moratorium on the 5G deployment until research is done, and the answer is blah. They are not listening to the scientists. It's signed by some 230 scientists asking for a moratorium all over the world.
So this person is saying that it was very interesting to hear the research results from Russia and then former Soviet Union republics, and he says that he has been part of this research work, and what he found out was that the lower the frequency,
not lower the frequency, but the power output from the antenna system, the stronger the influence on the human body.
the lower the power output from the antenna, the stronger the influence to the body.
The same with the screens. For example, the desk where we had kinescope type screens and LED screens. Again, the LED screens influence on the human body was stronger than from the kinescope type. This is the first part I wanted to say. The second one about the millimeter. I was quite a long time involved in the millimeter therapy work out of the different equipment and so on. And I can say that on the certain frequencies and in the certain conditions, yes, it's the medical treatment. But if we use the devices and treatment with the millimeter therapy on the human body, more than 10 minutes, the efficiency starts to come down quite quickly. We were not looking where it became bad, because we were looking about the efficiency of the healing. And as the results were showing that not more than 3 treatments per day is good, and the normal cycle of the treatment is not more than 2 weeks. So that I think that if it will go from morning up to the evening and from evening up to the morning, the millimeter waves influence on the human body probably will be not the best.
Okay, I will try to repeat that for the video. So there was a comment that basically newer screens emit more radiation.
No, they emit less, but your body don't understand that the emission is growing, and it means that it starts to the defend operations later when the influence is accumulated in your brain.
Okay, so newer screens emit lower radiation, but body doesn't figure out it needs to be defensive, and that's why the damage is bigger. I'm sorry, I'm gonna need to take other question. Yeah, follow.
In that more countries, any countries in Europe who have created not as strict guidelines, but suggestions how to do it more politely, more safely, or is it still undone work? Because it's very hard to fight against all these interest groups of manufacturing and operators. But is there a possibility? Do you know countries have done some kind of, say, suggestions or people just to announce people that it's dangerous and they can do it a little more, okay, reject the base station installation or just use it more. In Estonia, we have nothing as far as I know. There are guidelines for 4G and Wi-Fi in Finland, I know, in Russia, I know, just suggestions how to survive. But I don't know that. Do you know many countries have done it or not? How wide it is?
Well, it's an interesting question because as far as I know, most countries have not done it. It has not been done in Sweden, and people in general are uninformed because this is not a media question. We were to the Tallinn Technical Institute today and discussed one part, which is safety guidelines. We need to know about this technology and the other side of the coin. How can you protect yourself? Because there are some rules to can be doing. We have been actually involved in the police union in Sweden. They have measured for 5 years the police officers' exposure, and there are several ideas how this rather easily can be lowered. So this kind of information, as you talk about, is definitely needed, but it's not done so far, unfortunately. I would also say the microwave therapy, that is a very interesting question, and it shows how complex this is and that the research is really needed.
So the question is, we kind of have a comical situation. When you have long hair, you go to the hairdresser. But when you have when your car is broken, you go to your car mechanic. But in case of frequencies, when you have a situation like we are speaking today, then why are the engineers giving the expertise and doing all the decisions? Because they don't know anything about how human body works.
Well, that's an important question. At least they don't know so much about the human body, because mostly in these organizations there are no medical persons. It's engineers who are sitting and making the analysis of the results. And this is a major problem. We have in this EU moratorium, which we have sent to EU, we actually asked for an independent group of researchers from different disciplines, as you say, to do a new evaluation of the whole exposure situation. A non-ICNIRP group would be demanded. So, I mean, that's really a problem. I mean, we are in the hands of engineers, and furthermore, nobody is responsible. Who is responsible for harm that is done to the population? Who is responsible for them? Can we sue somebody?
The question is, in Sweden, would you happen to know if there is professional help for people who are highly sensible and cannot take any kind of radiation? Is there a professional help, like from healthcare or doctors, or what's the situation? There is no in Estonia.
No, that's the same in Sweden. It's a very bad situation because the electrosensitive persons are not recognized by the medical society. And of course, there is a multiple sign of different symptoms like headache, like skin problems, like problems to breathe or stomach problems. Okay, you name it. And these different medical problems, there's a variety from person to person. So you couldn't say like having an ulcer in the stomach that this is this exact type of medical disease. So most doctors do not recognize these problems, and they cannot say that or understand that this is depending on environmental exposure, in this case, radio frequency. There are a few persons who are interested, but they are not so many. So it's not so easy to get help.
So how is normally analyzed? Is it just one technology, or is it just everything?
Well, the problem is that there are almost no analysis, but we have, thanks to Tarmo Koppel here, been able to study exposure in the environment, like apartment in Sweden with base stations 6 meters from the apartment with extremely high levels of exposure. And we can see, based on medical issues, that this is not to be tolerated. But the problem is that it's mostly looked into the cumulative effect, and there is virtually no research, as far as I know, on single frequencies. Igor Belyayev has done some laboratory studies showing that the effects are frequency dependent. So some frequencies are more bad than others. But there is a big demand for more research on that. And this is a big question, because maybe there are frequencies we could tolerate better than others. I don't know.
So the question is, thanks to you, we got the recognition for the 2B category. And but most people in this room think it should be category 1. And when do you think is that going to be official and publicly recognized?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not our studies, it's other studies that are the basis for group 2B. But as I said, IARC will make a new evaluation within 5 years. So they have a 5-year span for new evaluations, which they are doing, and radio frequencies will be in the later part of that span, and that's because they are waiting on the results from a study on brain tumor risks in children, a MOBIC Kids study. The data are there, but I don't know why they haven't published it. So they are waiting for that to come out, and then there will be a new evaluation there. And group 1 is definitely what many researchers in this area go for, and say that this is a human carcinogen based on what we know today. And this would be a major breakthrough if it's group 1, because then nations would have to regulate the exposure. You can't go on with this type of exposure if it's group 1. I mean, look in asbestos and smoking and TCDD and other things which are regulated now due to the group 1. Then there are, of course, these legal cases going on in the United States, but as I understand, there is a halt on this because of technical issues, so they are not moving forward other than very slowly. There's an interesting parallel with the Roundup or glyphosate, which is a herbicide which is widely used by farmers. And summary studies have shown that this is a probable human carcinogen, group 2A. We have had part of those studies on looking into pesticides and lymphoma risk. And now they have gone to trial in the United States, and there was this spring a verdict, a jury decision that a single man who got the lymphoma was exposed to Roundup was awarded about $150 million US dollars as a compensation. And the latest one came 1 week ago. There they awarded $2 billion US dollars to one case with lymphoma, and there's quite a lot of other cases coming. So I think if we try to, well, of course this will be appealed, but it shows the way it's going. One way would of course be that people should be compensated who get the disease. Why not be compensated if you got a brain tumor and you have used, like your employer has forced you to use a mobile phone? It's part of your job, you should use it. So if they get, and these cases are coming now in Italy. There are, I think, 3 or 4 cases with an acoustic neurinoma tumor on the hearing nerve that have got workers' compensation. These are not high amounts of money because it's some compensation for salary deficit, but anyhow, and there is on queue several more cases in Italy. So they are working on this. So this is the legal aspect, and I think that the person who is polluting should pay. Why shouldn't they do that? I think that the legal issue is interesting, but it's extremely difficult for a single person to sue companies because they have all the money with the experts and juries. I think juries or lawyers, etc. They rely on the ICNIRP and say, well, this is below ICNIRP level, so it's no problem. So this is dismissed.
Is there a same effect on people who is either sensitive or not sensitive to the frequencies?
I don't know, actually. I mean, this is not so well studied. One can, of course, discuss of other problems, but if you are sensitive, the first thing is to avoid exposure. So then you will shift from an exposed group to an almost unexposed group, and this is certainly a healthy factor.
Many people who are sensitive, they are tired, very, very tired all the time, and they don't want to do anything. Is it from the dopamine level?
Yeah, it was, just in general comment that the dopamine level is the good feeling level, and I think there are studies showing that dopamine levels go up in this situation. I think Martin Pall knows much more. We have studied actually sleeping protein, beta trace protein as it's called, and in the young age group there was a significant association with the amount or the length of use of a mobile phone. And so there was a problem with this sleeping protein, which can explain why those who use the mobile phone late in the evening have difficulties to fall asleep. Yes, I think one interesting question which is not discussed is why everybody is forced to be exposed. Why can't we avoid exposure? Should we live in the forest, or can't we live in the cities, or can we drive a car in the future which already has so much electronics in it? And a self-driving car, how much exposure is it within that? Nobody has studied that as far as I know. So I think this is a democratic issue as well as a scientific issue. even if you don't agree that there is any major health effect, you could at least agree upon that in a democratic society you cannot force people to expose. And if you go to the medical world and you want to introduce a new drug or test something, you need to have ethical permission. You need to go to the ethics committee and say, is this study possible to do? And if they say yes, then they say that you must have written consent of all the participants. And when have they asked about written consent for 5G? I have never seen any discussion of that even. So this should be ethically discussed if you can really do this to human beings. Actually, there was Mikko Ahonen, one of our researchers who used to live in Tampere, now in Sundsvall. He went to the ethical committee in Umeå, which is one experimental city, and asked, how are the ethics about 5G? Can you really expose the people? And they say, this is not our agenda. They haven't introduced 5G, so we don't bother about that. But that's not the real question, because if you study a medical drug, you do it before you introduce it. So this is a stupid answer.
Introducing 2G, 3G, 4G, it hasn't been democratic. Who we should appeal?
Nothing is democratic about this issue. And I think Martin and others can all say that we have already health problems with 2G, 3G and 4G. That's clearly shown. 5G isn't even studied. And this is, who should you appeal to?
Thank you for your lecture, and we'll continue after a small break.